It's kind of funny to look back and realise just how rare it was to get handheld horror before the Switch, and you might even argue a kind of overlooked Sony handheld I'll get to. Something about looking at a small screen while surrounded by people on the bus isn't typically as conducive to spooks as a big old television, especially when the scariest thing about being on a bus is, the bus part. But there were a few of them on handhelds back in the day, some of them that offer portable scares as good as their bigger brothers, but you might be able to hear today's first game coming. Capcom's original mansion of death and nonsense made a surprisingly decent entrance on the DS in Resident Evil Deadly Silence. There was obviously also Revelations, Gaiden and Mercenaries 3D, but I somehow have never mentioned Deadly Silence on this channel. This is an often forgotten port of the 1996 classic to celebrate its 10th anniversary. It's still the Stars team, it's still zombies and that, and it's still all those classic lines that have been done to death. Jill Sandwich, don't open that door, But now you can sit on the toilet and speed things along when those dogs come crashing through the window. You can save the 45 Satsumas for your family. The port includes two modes. You've got Classic, which is a near perfect replica of the PS1 game, but you also have Rebirth, which sprinkles in touchscreen gimmicks like stabbing zombies on the bottom screen, yelling "come on" into the mic, and solving surgery puzzles mid-boss fight like it's Trauma Center with gore. It also adds a few extra enemies and kind of awkward knife sections to make the most of the DS tech. Multiplayer co-op and versus modes were here too, though no one's touched them since 2008 really. GameSpot said the port retains all the scares of the original, while GameSpy highlighted the novelty. It's still a novelty now, really, it is. But like the Super Mario 64 port to the handheld, it shows just how ambitious the Nintendo DS truly was. Going from the GBA, as much as we love it, to the DS was mind-blowing. You can't explain that to someone who wasn't there at the time. If you're a Resident Evil collector, this one may burn a hole in your pocket in multiple ways, but it's a cool curio worth hunting down to see the origins of the series in a new way. For quite a long time, Silent Hill felt like it may be too brooding and cinematic for a handheld. Then came Silent Hill Origins on PSP, a prequel that tried to set up the cursed town before Harry Mason's fateful car crash. I guess we can thank it for the existence of Book of Memories. Thanks. Here you play as Travis Grady, who's a trucker who makes the classic horror mistake of helping a child in distress. Idiot. Naturally the kid is a lesser, and naturally things spiral into cults, monsters, and a heavy dose of "this will all make sense later, maybe you're also dead, grieving, or guilty." Origins kept the series' oppressive tone intact with dimly lit rooms, radio crackles, and plenty of otherworld shifts, but it did move more toward combat than other Silent Hill games. Travis can fistfight abominations or improvise with everyday weapons like lamps and meat cleavers, but everything breaks pretty quickly, forcing you to scavenge. On paper it makes every encounter tense, though in practice it sometimes feels like you're reenacting Steven Seagal's latest movie in a second-hand shop. IGN gave it 7.6, noting it does a good job of capturing the Silent Hill atmosphere despite technical hiccups, and it was later ported to the PS2. Fans mostly remember this one as a better-than-expected handheld experiment, even with it missing that Team Silent magic, as this was the first proper game they didn't develop in the series. Still, it is an interesting little moment in Silent Hill history, and Shattered Memories wasn't too far behind. The eve of the next game is upon us. Oh yeah, it's been a minute. Square Enix's decision to resurrect Parasite Eve as a third-person horror shooter on the PSP was bold at best, but misguided at worst. The third birthday isn't officially branded as Parasite Eve 3, but it stars Aya Breyer, features body horror monstrosities, and wraps everything in enough technobabble to make you suddenly burst into flames. This time, Arya is in New York facing off against the Twisted, an alien menace that arrives through time warping phenomena. If that sounds confusing, don't worry, it's only just getting started. Mechanically, this is an over-the-shoulder action shooter that borrows more from Gears of War than survival horror. The big twist is Overdive, a system where Arya can teleport her consciousness into allied soldiers on the battlefield, get it, dive, effectively body hopping mid-fight. I will always play games with this mechanic, but it seems nobody else did though. Critics were pretty sharply divided on this one. IGN gave it a pretty impressive 8.5 out of 10, while Eurogamer found it visually impressive but narratively incoherent. They said it was a brain-optional affair, which is kind of funny really. Fans of the first two Parasite Eve games weren't thrilled, and they still aren't today really, with many feeling it stripped away survival horror in favour of generic gunplay and unnecessary starfish shots of Arya. Still, for all its flaws, the third birthday remains one of the weirder attempts at handheld horror, and it really is worth experiencing even today. When you think of the Nintendo DS, you probably picture Mario, brain training, or Nintendogs, and probably not mental asylums and monsters shaped like me after 100 custard creams too many. That's a joke, that you can never have too many custard creams. That's why Dementium stands out. Renegade kids have now got a Doom-style shooter series running on Nintendo's touchscreen machine, and then decided to lace it with Asylum Corridors monsters and enough blood to make Shigsy swoon. The first game, Dementium The Ward, throws you into a psychiatric hospital with no memory and no real plan beyond surviving the shambling creatures inside. It's dang atmospheric for the hardware, with flickering lights, creepy ambient sound, and stylus aiming that worked surprisingly well. Unfortunately, it also suffered from brutal respawn points and enemies that felt more like bullet sponges than genuine threats. It did get some good reviews, but a lot of them did note that it was quite repetitive. The sequel, Dementium 2, tightened things up considerably. Levels were more varied, bosses were stronger, and the narrative tried harder to build a twisted psychological angle. Combat still wasn't, silky smooth or that amazing, but it was undeniably more refined, and the environments pushed the DS about as far as it could go. Together, the two games are fascinating little artifacts that are a bit blocky to look at today, and they kind of feel very flash gamey. But they are proof that horror could exist on Nintendo's family-friendly handheld without compromise. If you're interested in handheld horror history, they're worth a look just to see how much cheek Renegade Kid had back in the day. And hey, they did get some pretty weak ports to modern platforms not long ago, if you fancy that. Infected is just about the most Limp Bizkit handheld horror game you will ever find, and is glorious. Hands up if that doesn't sound appealing to you. Alright, now hands down. Tell me what you're going to do now. Developed by Planet Moon Studios, who I will always love for giant Citizen Kabuto, Infected was one of the first PSP shooters and was about as subtle as an American in double denim on Independence Day. The story is basically Christmas in New York, but with zombies. No, not Home Alone 2. You play a cop trying to contain an outbreak by blowing everything to bits, and that's pretty much all the plot you'll get between cutscenes. Gameplay here is pure arcade action. You've got two weapons at all times, your regular gun and a special viral weapon linked to your own infected blood. Shoot enemies to weaken them, then finish them off with your blood shot to cause chain reactions. It's simple, flashy, and kinda fun. Online multiplayer was the real gimmick, letting you spread your infection to other players' save data in a kind of digital plague. That's crazy. At the time, it was pretty revolutionary stuff, but now pretty much forgotten. Reviews were positive, but not that positive. GameSpot gave it 7.2, saying it gave a real raw, visceral satisfaction. Fans remember it as a fun little bit of nonsense. It wasn't scary, not deep, but a fascinating time capsule of when the PSP was experimenting with online and zombies weren't all that overdone. It's throwaway fun, but it's hard to see why Sony has left this idea all alone for so long. Yomawari Night Alone is a horror game that feels like it was cresting on the wave of indie horror that was just about to break out, especially as this was released for the Vita. People always cite the Switch as helping indie and indie horror to break into the handheld world, but really it was Sony's forgotten slab of wonder. You play as a nameless little girl searching her small town at night after her dog and sister vanish. There are no guns, no upgrades, and no way to fight back. See what I meant earlier about cresting on that wave? You only have a flashlight, the ability to sprint for a few seconds, and the thumping of her heartbeat whenever something monstrous draws near. Shadows warp into grotesque creatures, abandoned streets stretch on forever, and familiar spaces become uncanny under dim light. The distinctly Japanese atmosphere carries the whole experience. Until audio design really picks up the slack, the low pixel style leaves behind. Destructoid praised it as quietly unsettling, while Rely on Horror highlighted its emotional impact, particularly in its brutal opening. On Metacritic it sits at 75 out of 100, which is, not bad at all. The game's success spawned a small series. Yomawari Midnight Shadows refined the formula with 2 playable characters and richer storytelling, while Yomawari Lost in the Dark pushed it onto modern consoles. Though they feel kinda quaint in the current horror landscape, these are still games you should be party to. You can chuck a party all you want, you'll still be a bit smelly. What started as a scrappy project back in 1996 got polished up for PSP as the daftly named Corpse Party Blood-Covered Repeated Fear, but complete with voice acting. The setup is classic schoolyard horror. A group of friends do a silly stay together forever charm, end up in a haunted school from another dimension, and then spend the rest of the game dying horribly. Let this be a lesson to you the next time you try to have friends. It looks deceptively cute with its chibi style sprites, but the tone is pretty merciless. You wander around dim corridors, poke through classrooms, and inevitably stumble across corpses of kids who did the exact same charm. There's no combat here, you just got puzzles, tense chases, and choices that can doom characters instantly. The infamous wrong ends are where the game really goes a bit mental, giving you some of the most creative and nasty deaths you'll ever see in a handheld title. Critics were impressed with it. Rely on Horror gave it 8.5 out of 10, calling it a very unique experience. Corpse Party on PSP was about as dark as handheld horror could get at the time. It went on to spawn Book of Shadows on PSP, lots of random book of games, and Blood Drive on Vita, plus a bunch of side stories and spin-offs. But if you want the rawest, nastiest version of Corpse Party, this PSP release should get you into the spirit of things pretty quickly. Man, Spirit Camera seemed kinda genius, right? Okay, take the fatal frame idea of photographing ghosts and literally make the 3DS your camera obscura. It shipped with a real Diary of Faces booklet, which the handheld camera scanned to spawn spectres, puzzles, and jump scares right into your room. You're roped into helping a girl named Maya break a curse, while the woman in black stalks you through a mix of story chapters and AR minigames. But how is it to actually play? Well, the 3DS camera wasn't exactly built for reliable horror, putting you in a horror game. You needed bright light for the system to even recognise the booklets, meaning your midnight ghost hunt often turned into pacing around a well-lit living room. Spooky. Well, it works though, it is brilliant. Aiming the handheld at different corners of your space while ghosts rush at you is goofy, and there are flashes of real fatal faint dread here. They just don't come reliably enough. Destructoid found the gameplay more hassle than reward, saying that lighting restrictions defeat the object of portable horror. On Metacritic it holds a not great 54 out of 100, and the game has basically been forgotten over the years. It never lived up to the Fatal Frame name, but as a weird 3DS experiment, Spirit Camera is at least memorable. It's more of a tech demo than a game, but you could have quite literal skeletons in your closet, or a cupboard, if you like to touch tea. Alright, this one's like someone's trying to give the DS its own House of the Dead, but you're stuck with a little pen instead of a plastic gun at that arcade with the weird bloke who used to stare at you for a bit too long. You're Rob Steiner, no relation, who's been wrongly convicted and now stuck in a prison blasting zombies that pop out the walls with touch commands. The gimmick here is pretty simple. Tap the touchscreen to fire, drag bullets to reload. It works, but that reload is so sluggish it becomes its own form of horror. Presentation doesn't help much either. The graphics are stiff and blocky like a PS1 game with a hangover, and the pacing is pretty plodding. Still, there's something grimly satisfying about tapping a zombie clean right off and watching limbs ragdoll around the cell block. Critics weren't convinced though. GameSpot said swapping a light gun for the stylus didn't excuse the stiff and boxy presentation. But on the other end, Nintendo Life actually enjoyed its trashy charm, giving it 8 out of 10. They were pretty much the outliers though, as Metacritic averages a score of 56 out of 100. So yeah, it is janky, clunky and half-baked, but if you want a DS horror curio where you literally poke zombies to death, it delivers exactly that. And hey, if you want an actual handheld House of the Dead game, here you go. What do you mean pinball isn't scary and this isn't horror? Remember that time you were at that arcade playing on the Shrek machine and the dude stared at you for a bit too long? Only Sega would look at House of the Dead and think, yeah, that's pinball, baby. Pinball of the Dead takes the zombie shooting arcade series and crams it into 3 spooky pinball tables on the Game Boy Advance of all places. You're knocking balls into boss fights, spelling out words to trigger minigames, and watching hordes of pixelated zombies lurch across the table at you like you just defeated the quiet kid in a round of Yu-Gi-Oh! At lunchtime. Mechanically, it's just some solid ass pinball. The ball physics are fast and snappy for the GBA, and each table has its own set of tricks, from multi-ball chaos to huge bosses pulled straight from House of the Dead 2. It even squeezes in creepy voice clips and gloomy visuals that sell the vibe, despite the handheld limitations. Reception was positive, if just a little surprised that it worked at all. GameSpot gave it 8 out of 10, praising the table design, and Metacritic sits at 79, marking it as one of the better oddball spin-offs of its era, and also one of the best handheld horror games of all time before the Switch came out, technically. No matter what, it's at least better than those 2 remakes. How did they mess that up? Hopefully, I didn't mess up this video. I've been Jimmy of Culture Vultures. It's been good to have you, and I'll see you in the next one.